Today on the bench we have a original or first design Tram D201. So this is the hand-wired 23 channel radio. Customer sent this in for restoration. Really didn't have any modifications. Let me put it this way: it wasn't a disaster, because you see a lot of these radios. Whew, boy, they're in rough shape because they've had a lot of stuff done to them over the decades. This one, not so much. I still need to clean the faceplate up. Already cleaned out the inside, but the outside is the last thing I do, so I haven't gotten to that point. So yes, the knobs are still dirty, the faceplate and so on. But it's a nice radio. Someone had restuffed the electrolytic can caps in this at some point, and yeah, that wasn't such a great job, because actually one section was open. I'll probably do a separate video on that, the can caps, how not to restuff them, because whatever they used corroded the leads off of the caps that they used to restuff with. But so it has new can caps installed, all electrolytics, the normal stuff you do on one of these. Replace all of the high wattage resistors, check your low wattage resistors, make sure they're still in tolerance. Usually they're fine. You might find a couple of them. Like I say, the high wattage ones, pretty much rule of thumb, they gotta go. I don't know how many of these I've done. I've even done videos on that, shown basically take all of the high wattage resistors you remove out of one of these things, sit there and just check them with an ohm meter, and you'll find like 80+% of them usually are out of tolerance. So they get really hot. And they're old, and they're carbon composition, so it's got a lot of things against them. We use modern metal film resistors to replace them with, so they're going to last the life of the owner, probably the next owner. I'm not going to say they'll last forever, but just a lot higher quality and modern style resistors. The other thing this had was, you can see there is a toggle switch in the back, so somebody's done a power mod. Yeah, I'm not into that with these radios. It had two switches. I removed the other switch. I don't know what they had that in there for. They had, in the bias line, they had an extra 100K resistor, and with that thing in there, I could not get the final tube neutralized properly, could not get the bias adjusted, so that went away. Customer may have wanted to keep it, I don't know, but you can't do it. If you can't get the bias adjusted properly on this thing, it's got to go. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. So, the other one, it works. Hey, whatever floats your boat, I ain't into it. Now, another thing you may notice, something's different in here with tubes. Yeah, it's got a monster in it. Again, it's the way it came to me. I would not recommend doing this. It's got a KT88 in it. This radio, you're not going to get any benefits from that, honestly. Some people will say, oh, you'll get better audio frequency response. Hoo-ha. All that is a beefed up 6L6. You get a good old 6L6, you'll get fantastic audio quality out of it. It's got way more audio power for starters than this radio could ever need. The 6L6, what originally would have come in it and what should be in it. They're basically the same tube. Like I say, this is a large glass or a large bottle, has the metal base. It's a modern tube. Personally, I'd stick with a good old, like an RCA, GE, a Zenith tube. They made really good tubes back in the day, and people want those and use those in their stereo amplifiers and whatnot, because they have really good sound quality. But hey, whatever floats your boat. If you want to stick the KT88 in there, have at it. Same thing with the final. It's got a little bit heavier tube in it. Instead of a 6L6 again, it's got a 7581. Yeah, again, it's not really going to hurt anything. It's not like it's drawing anything extra. It's just basically, again, a beefier 6L6. So it's neither of those is going to hurt anything. Now this one may actually have a slightly higher current drain for the filaments. I'd actually have to pull the data sheet on this specific tube from this manufacturer to find out. But if I had to guess, I'd say the current draw on this is probably a little bit higher. Honestly, the easiest way for me to tell would be take it out, shove in an original old 6L6, like GC in it, just see what the current draw is on the radio, pull that tube back out, stick this one back in, see what the current draw is on the radio, and see if it increases. I get a feeling it is, because the current draw on this radio right now is, actually what I'm looking at over there is because it's hooked up to the isolation transformer. It's drawing a little over an amp. Not a lot, but it is a little bit higher than it normally would be, but not enough to concern yourself. Especially in the earlier radio. This is the ones you really have to watch out for is the absolute last version of the D201s, and that's the D201A. The last version had a smaller transformer. So you definitely don't want to go doing crazy shit in one of those. But in this radio, like I say, it should be fine. So other than that, the only other things the customer wanted was a frequency counter tap installed on the radio. So that's been installed. He sent a frequency counter along with it. So actually, that's this little guy right there. So it's hooked up. It has an RCA jack on the back of the radio. Now this runs off of 13.8 or 12 volt external power supply. So other than that, this can easily be installed or removed from this radio now. It's handy, especially with that's one modification this radio does have is the manual tuning knob is unlocked. So you can see if we switch to manual, that makes it very handy for fine-tuning, because these dials can get off a little bit. And honestly, you'll notice this radio, since I've turned it on, I've noticed the frequency on that counter drift. And that's going to happen. And it's probably going to take 15 minutes to a half hour for everything to stabilize. For starters, tube radio, all crystal synthesized. There's no PLL in this thing. So as the temperature rises, the frequency changes. Same thing with the manual tuning. You've got mechanical parts in here, capacitors, things can change actual size. So, capacitance and inductance can change as the radio warms up. Same thing with this counter. The counter, from the time you turn it on, and it gets warm, because this thing has a boatload of old 7400 and 4000 series TTL and CMOS ICs in it, so it gets rather warm. And it has a crystal, because that's what it uses. It's comparing the frequency coming out of this radio to the frequency going into this counter, or the frequency that's generated in here, and this is, the display then. So, again, as that crystal heats up, the counter is not going to be accurate. This thing does not have a crystal oven, so, it can take it time to stabilize. So, maybe the last digit on this thing, yeah, it's going to be, like I say, it's going to, until both of them are warm. Now, actually, I had this calibrated to the radio. So, when you do the alignment on one of these, you wait for the radio to get up to full operating temperature. So, that's what I had done, then hooked up the frequency counter to it. I let it set with the cover on for well over a half hour. I think I probably had hooked up while I was doing the alignment on this radio. And then I went in, because this does have a trimmer capacitor in it to adjust the frequency, so that was done. But like I say, that now adds nice digital display, and when he doesn't need it, it's not hardwired. Just unplug the RCA cable from the back of the radio, bam. You can move that to maybe another radio you might happen to have. So did that. The only other thing the customer asked for was he's going to be running I don't know if he has a true rack system, but he wants to run a good microphone through an EQ. So he wanted to bypass some of the audio mic preamplification circuit in this radio, so that was done. So the first mic amp stage in this radio has now been bypassed. It's very simple to do. Basically, just stick something like a 0.01 microfarad cap right to the... Now, I wouldn't recommend doing it up here. I'd do it down on the bottom of the radio. But basically, what you hook up to is the mic gain, the wiper of the mic gain. Now, the wiper of the mic gain in this radio goes straight down to the second amplifier. So basically, what you can do is just hook up your cap right there, and then put a quarter. And what I did was installed a 1/4-inch mic jack on the back of this. So this has two new jacks on the back. The 1/4-inch mic jack is going to make this radio look more or less like the older radio, or the newer radios. So this radio only had one mic jack, or 1/4-inch jack on the back. The later radios had two jacks, because they had a transmit, a keying jack on the back instead of just an external speaker like this had. So it now has two 1/4-inch jacks, and then sandwiched in between those two, that's where I stuck the RCA jack. So other than that, that's pretty much all that was done to it. It's a good working radio. Sounds good. Now I actually have it hooked up to a little bit of test equipment here. I just wanted to see I just got done actually installing that 1/4-inch mic jack, so I'm pretty much done with the radio now. I can get it put back together, get it cleaned up. But I wanted to get it hooked up and see, because like I said, I'd already done the alignment on it, and I wanted to see what the audio looks like basically on air with the first mic amp bypass. I wanted to see what its audio bandwidth was, how flat the frequency response is. Because, honestly, it doesn't matter how good of an audio you put into something, if the radio has a gigantic muffler inside of it that, is snuffing that signal out, yeah, putting good audio in doesn't do any good. Now, of course, this is a Tram D201. They were known for booming audio to start with a very good frequency response, very wide frequency response out of the box. It's an older radio. They didn't have a lot of the restrictions and just a lot of the filtering that they stick into newer radios that actually kind of limits your audio bandwidth. So what I have it hooked up to is actually several things. So running in that 1/4-inch mic jack in the back, I actually have the signal generator up here. So we're going to be sweeping from, actually I have to change the setting here so I can see. We're going to sweep from 150 hertz up to 5,000 hertz. So that's an audio frequency. The spectrum analyzer down here is hooked up to a sample port on the antenna output, as is the oscilloscope over there. So if I put the radio into transmit, you can see there's our carrier, and you can see the carrier in AM. You can see there's the carrier on the oscilloscope, and I'll enable the output. So now we're sweeping from 150 hertz to 5,000 hertz. I think I got the time set to what, like 3 seconds sweep time. And has a good flat response. You look down here, now you're not really going to see, well actually you would see that somewhat on the oscilloscope, but it's a lot easier to see on the spectrum analyzer. So if you look down here at the spectrum analyzer, the peaks as they go out, those are your upper and lower sidebands. So your carriers in the middle, upper and lower sidebands. I have the analyzer bandwidth set up to 10 kilohertz, so that's, I'm on channel 20 with the radio. So that's the entire band of channel 20, and you can see that peak. What you want, when I say flat frequency response, you can see that those sidebands, the amplitude isn't really varying. It doesn't start out way down here and go up or drop off towards the outside edge. You can see it has a fairly flat response the whole way across, from 150 hertz the whole way out to 5,000 hertz. It's about as flat as you get. Yeah, I'm just sitting here looking at it, and yeah, I mean, that's that's a really, really, really nice flat response. So, actually, let me grab a walkie-talkie here. You may be able to hear it a little bit. It's actually just some of what's resonating inside the radio. So here's just through a walkie-talkie. So, there you go. But there's a Tram D201 hand-wired. Like I say, nice radio. Actually, as far as parts go, needed a lot of tubes. I was kind of surprised. I honestly don't know if I've ever changed this many tubes in a Tram. I don't load up a shotgun with vacuum tubes when I do a radio and just put all new tubes in it. If it only needs one tube, it gets one tube. If it doesn't need any tubes, I don't install any tubes. A lot of people say, yeah, but they're old. Doesn't matter. They're vacuum tubes. In a lot of cases, ideally, you want to be using the older tubes, and especially they're tubes that just aren't made anymore. They're going to be old anyhow. You have to remember, people, they're vacuum tubes. They're in a vacuum. As long as that vacuum hasn't been breached, the vacuum tube's just as good a condition today as it was 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. But yeah, this one needed, so what do we got, 6, 7, 8, 9 tubes. Yeah, I was kind of surprised. Had a lot with, either low output. Some of them had shorts. Some of them, I think 2 of them were showing a little bit of gas. So that's an indication that the vacuum seal has started to be breached a little bit. But yeah, so there's 6 tubes there. There's another 3 over here. Here's actually the bottoms. Those can caps that I replaced. The tops were already down on my recycle thing. Like I say, somebody had cut the tops off and restuffed them. And yeah, whatever they used, it corroded the leads off of them. So yeah, those were replaced. All the other electrolytic capacitors on the bottom side. And the high wattage carbon composition resistors, like I say, these things always go, because these, you can go through these and you'll find probably like 80% of these things are going to be out of tolerance. And it doesn't matter how well they look. They can look like that. Nice, shiny, and new. Trust me, you look up an ohm meter to these things, I've shown that time and time again. They'll be horribly out of tolerance. I mean, it's just amazing how far those things can get out. But you have to remember, they're big for a reason. They get really stinking hot. And no difference with the ones that I put in here. Now, I'll use, in place of 2 watts, I'll usually use 3 or 5 watts. 1 watts, I'll use a 2 watt. And if I replace like a half watt, there's a couple in here, smaller ones that I had to replace. I'll usually install like a 1 watt. But even those, you turn this radio on for 15 minutes, if you touch one of those resistors, you're probably going to come away with a blister in some of them. They get hot, really, really hot. So it's really hard on those old carbon composition resistors. And our modern metal film resistors nowadays, they're just so more tolerant to those extreme heats. And you don't have the problems you had with the old carbon composition resistors, with the glyptal being baked out of them, and just changing value with time. So there you go. Here's a nice Tram D201, original hand-wired version. Like I said, all I gotta do is get her put back together here. Actually, let me just shut it off here really quick. Let me just get all this equipment turned off here. We don't need. Frequency counter, my mic input, power. We'll just get her flipped over. I'll show you the underside. Okay. Little clamp off here. And if you're wondering what this is, I use these plastic, I love these plastic clamps for working on the trams. Whenever you work on these with the lid off, of course, this turns off the radio. This is a safety switch. This is so owners don't electrocute themselves in these things. You have to remember, very high voltages inside of this radio. I'm a radio tech. I need to be working on this with the covers off. So, I need a way to be able to keep this switch in the on position. And I found I got a bunch of these plastic clamps. Man, they work perfect. The spacing between the inside edge of this screw head and the switch, if I put that clamp in there, it's perfect. Holds it in the on position. So that's all that is. And that's what its purpose in life is. So, get this flipped over. Okay, and here's the underside. So you can see all new resistors, so all the high wattage resistors. Like I say, some of the smaller ones were replaced, especially here. I think I've done a separate video maybe on even these. These 2 resistors here are furnaces. They get really hot, and the originals are down a lot closer to the to the terminal tie strips. And what they will do is they'll bake all of the resistors around here. So don't be surprised if you ever recap one of these hand-wired radios. Any resistor that's sitting, remember the radio's upside down right now, so any resistor that's above those 2 resistors, 9 times out of 10 you're going to have to replace it. So most of the ones right here in this area, they're usually baked. I mean, black and burnt sometimes. A lot of times that'll be the problem. Your radio's stopped working, and you'll find burned up resistors in this area. That's because these 2 big resistors here have fried a lot of them. So when you reinstall new resistors, leave the leads on these longer so the heat can dissipate. It has more room to vent out inside the radio cabinet before it comes up and hits those. But like I say, all high wattage resistors were replaced. Here's that capacitor, an orange drop in here. So there's the RCA jack for the frequency counter, and then the new 1/4 inch jack for the mic audio input. Now, you do stuff like that, try to use coax cable. You can see here, actually, this cable here is good, really high quality, because this is frequency. You really don't want stuff, because you got to remember, you're hooking this up into the mixing circuit, basically, inside your radio. So you don't want other signals leaching in. It's not so much that you're worried about signal loss. It's that you don't want signals leaching in, because you're taking a sample from up, actually, you're taking a sample from right here, okay? So basically right off of this coil right here. And you don't want other signals leaching into that, so this is an extremely high-quality mil-spec Teflon coax cable. Silver-plated wire, the whole 9 yards. Yeah, I got a roll of that stuff one time. I priced it one time. It's like $9 and something a foot. I mean, it's one of those holy shit expensive coax cables. But I got it cheap, so I use it for stuff like this. And then just a more standard Beldan coax cable down here. But same thing. You're going to be running, audio from the back to the front of the radio. The factory used coax. Now, granted, they use cheap coax cable. Actually, here's a piece of it right here. This one here that has the red wire hooking up right there. That's actually the cable that goes up to the mic gain. So you can see that's where we have the orange drop attached right there to here. Coax cable that comes back to the jack. Another thing on these radios when you do these, I always recommend replacing. Oh, where is that little guy? Here somewhere. There it is. The original cap. So this is actually a dual element cap. It's 4700 picofarads, but you can see it's got 3 legs on it. So there's actually 2 capacitors in one, but those would go from line to ground off your power socket on the back. I always recommend replacing these. And when you do, don't reuse this style capacitor. Don't just use normal ceramics. I've seen quite a few of these explode, the originals, over the years, to the point of actually setting the transformer on fire on some of them because this paper that's wrapped around it. This is old school. These are modern style capacitors. So these things are rated not to basically flame out. So they're attached exactly the same, but instead of a 2-in-1 cap, there's 2 of them. So there's one there and one there. But same thing, line to ground, line to ground. Now, this is something the factory doesn't install. I usually do. That's an across-the-line filter cap. So these are X1, Y2 rated, and this one's, what, I guess that would be the Y2, I think it is? I can never remember that. Yes, Y2. I actually had to look over here at another cap. Yeah, the Y2s are rated for, across the line. So there you go. There's the underside. Another Tram D201 ready to be put back together and basically be put into use for another 30-plus years of radio enjoyment.